Hello everyone, welcome back to the Laughing Hydra Gaming channel, the many heads of gaming. Today we are going to be talking about Lorcana, a collectible trading card game created by Ravensburger and Disney. More specifically, I'm going to teach you how to play. It's very similar to Magic the Gathering and other popular trading card games. I'm going to do my best to explain the rules to you as simply as possible. I would like to start off by saying that as a lifelong Magic the Gathering player, I find Lorcana to be a refreshing and fun card game with new mechanics and easy to follow rules. A brief description as taken directly from the rules is that as an Illumineer in the wondrous realm of Lorcana, you'll wield magical ink to summon new versions of Disney characters and items, which are called glimmers. These glimmers, some familiar, some fantastic, will help you race across Lorcana to find and collect missing pieces of lore. Endless quests await. And this lore is how you win the game. The first player to generate 20 or more lore wins. So now let's talk about the cards themselves. First off, there are three basic card types. These are characters, which you will most definitely recognize if you are a fan of Disney, items, and actions. There is also a subset of actions called songs, but we'll get to these in a bit. So, now that you know what types of cards there are, let's talk about the parts of a card. At the top left of each card is the cost. This is how much ink a card costs to play. Ink. What is ink, you may ask? Ink is the main card-playing resource of Lorcana. The cost number is the amount of ink to play this card. To create ink in Lorcana, once per turn, you may take an inkable card from your hand and place it in your inkwell. The inkwell is just the part of the playing field where your ink cards stay. To do this, the card must have this special border around it. Then you reveal the card to your opponent, and then you may place it in your inkwell by flipping the card over, the back facing up. So the next part of the card you should now recognize. The inkwell icon is cards that have this border on their casting cost. Otherwise, they are not inkable. So now we have the name. Characters also have a version name, which is listed here. You are allowed to have up to 4 of the same card in your deck named the same thing. Mickey Mouse, Wayward Sorcerer, for example, and then Mickey Mouse, Brave Little Tailor are both Mickey, but for the purpose of Lorcana, there are different cards and you may have 4 of each of these Mickeys in your deck, if you so choose. The next part of a card is the classification. These are categories sometimes referenced in card rules. Mickey Mouse Wayward Sorcerer references brooms. So, for a card with a broom classification, it would be affected by Mickey Mouse's Animate Broom ability. This also classifies things like villains or princesses. The next part of the card is the ink symbol. This symbol and the colored band behind the card indicate the card's ink type. There are 6 different types of ink in Lorcana. Amber, which is yellow, Emerald, which is green, Sapphire is blue, Amethyst is purple, Ruby is red, and Steel is gray. The next part of a card is the abilities and text. This, as noted in the official rules, is the card's special rules. On actions, these are called effects. On characters and items, most abilities have a story-based name, especially common abilities, which are bolded keywords like Rush, as noted here. Other keyword abilities are Bodyguard, Challenger, Evasive, Reckless, Rush, Shift, Support, and Ward. One thing I love about Lorcana at this point is that all of these abilities are spelled out on each card, so you don't need to memorize all of these or keep some sort of reference sheet or anything. We will discuss what each of these abilities mean later when we discuss the gameplay. All of the parts of the card that were previously mentioned are on all cards. Now let's talk about things that are only on characters. The first thing to note is the strength and willpower. Strength and willpower are how much damage this character will do during a challenge, and how much damage it can take before it is banished. And finally, we have the lore value. The lore value is how much lore you gain when your character quests. Questing is one of the main gameplay mechanics of Lorcana and one of the main ways to get lore, which is your victory points. So now that you have an understanding about all the parts of the cards, we are ready to talk about gameplay. The first step is setting up the game. First, we shuffle our deck and then draw 7 cards for our starting hand. You are then allowed to alter your starting hand. For new players, this step is suggested to be skipped. However, it is a very beneficial part of our gameplay, so we are going to be doing that here. Altering your hand is described as this. Before each game begins, each player can alter their starting hand one time, beginning with the first player. Usually, a player does this if they don't have very many cards with the inkwell icons on them, or if too many of their cards have a high cost. To do this, you put any number of cards from your hand on the bottom of your deck without revealing them, and then draw cards until your hand has 7 cards again. Finally, reshuffle your deck. So now, after we have shuffled our deck, set our lore tracker to 0, drawn 7 cards, and then possibly altered our starting hand, we determine the first player by some random event, like flipping a coin or rolling a dice, rock, paper, scissors, however you decide to do this. Once the starting player has been determined, you are ready to start your game. Turns are set up into 2 basic phases. You have the beginning phase and your main phase. The beginning phase has 3 separate parts. Ready, you can ready your exerted cards by turning them upright. Set, check for effects that happen at the start of your turn and follow their instructions. And then draw. You draw a card from the top of your deck. However, the first player skips this step as they already have an advantage since they are playing first. Next, we have the main phase. Once per turn, you may put a card face down into your inkwell at any time. But remember, they must have the special icon on them in order for the card to be inked. Additionally, you can take any actions that are listed below any number of times in any order that you want. This allows you to take full advantage of what your cards can do in a combination with their other effects. This is play a card, use a character ability that doesn't require them to exert, use an item ability, take an action with a character that's been in play from the start of your turn, which includes questing, challenging an opponent's exerted character, or using an ability that requires them to exert. So now that you know the parts of a card and all the parts of a turn, I think we're ready for some gameplay. I lost the coin flip, so I go second. Then I proceed to draw 7 cards. I also take the optional rule of altering my hand, and I get rid of some of my higher casting cost cards. My opponent gets to go first. They have an inkable card, as in Jafar, so they create 1 ink, and then may play Stitch, a character that only costs 1. Playing a card just means that you take it from your hand and you put it face up on the table. Each card has an ink cost and a hexagon in the top upper left corner. To play the card, you must exert that many cards in your inkwell. Cards will be in 2 positions in Lorcana. Ready cards are just up and down, and then exerted cards are on its side. Some game rules or card effects require you to exert or move a card sideways in play. To exert, you just turn it sideways. Once a card is exerted, you can't exert it again until it's been readied by a game rule or a card effect. To ready a card, you simply turn it back upright. Remember, to ready all of your exerted cards at the beginning of your turn. That is during the ready phase. So now that my opponent is finished, it's my turn. I will ink Maleficent, and then I have what is called an action. An action will be discarded once you play it, and it does not stay on the table. This specific action is called Develop Your Brain. It costs 1 ink and allows me to look at the top 2 cards of my deck, put 1 into my hand, and then the other on the bottom of my deck. So now I am done and my opponent gets to go again. Here we get to talk about questing. To quest with one of your characters, you exert them, and then you gain lore equal to their lore value. Remember that you can't quest with a character the same turn that you play them. In this example, Lilo will quest for 2 lore. They would set their lore tracker from 0 to 2, and then they are finished with their turn. Lorcana has two different conditions to end the game. The first player to reach 20 lore points or more will win. Otherwise, if your deck runs out of cards, you will lose the next time that you would have to draw. So now that we've talked about playing a card and questing, let's talk about challenging. Challenging is the combat in Lorcana. So questing is how you win the game, but sometimes you need to slow your opponents down. This is where challenging comes in. First, exert one of your characters to send them into the challenge. Then, choose an opponent's exerted character to challenge. You cannot challenge a ready character. Both characters in a challenge deal damage. Look at each of the character's strength, which is the sun-looking icon, and put that many damage counters on the other character. In my example here, I control Aladdin, which is a 5 strength, 5 willpower character. I am going to challenge the exerted Simba. Simba has 2 strength and 3 toughness. Aladdin will deal 5 damage to Simba, which will banish it, which is the discard pile of Lorcana. And in turn, Simba will do 2 damage to Aladdin. However, this damage will stay on the character until it is either healed or the creature is banished itself. So now let's talk about using abilities. Many items and characters have abilities you can use during your turn, and only during your turn. These normally affect other cards in play. Cards in a player's deck, discard, hand, or inkwell are not considered in play, so they aren't affected by cards unless they say otherwise. If a card or ability has a cost, that appears before its effect, with the two separated by a dash. The cost might include an exert cost, which is the hexagon with the arrow pointing to the right, or an ink cost, which is just this open hexagon. Text that explains the cost, or a combination of these. You must pay every part of an ability's cost in order to play the ability. And remember, you can't use abilities of characters that you played this turn. So now that we've talked about all the main parts of a turn, and most of the cards, let's talk about some of the finer details. So remember when I brought up songs? Well, songs are a type of action, and you can play one just like any other action, but you can play one by paying its cost and resolving its effect, but you can also use a character to sing. The sing cost is usually the cost of the character, although there are some characters with special abilities that will allow them to sing cards that cost higher than their casting cost. So, if a card costs 5, instead of paying 5 ink, you can exert a character that costs 5 or more to sing this card, and then basically play it for just the exert cost instead of also paying the ink. And then finally, we'll talk about those special abilities. So in Lorcana, we have a couple keyworded abilities. In alphabetical order, we'll start with Bodyguard. This character may enter play exerted. An opposing character who challenges one of your characters must choose one with Bodyguard if able. So this definitively becomes like your standard blocker. It's very useful if you have lower cost characters out that will exert for a lot of lore and you want to protect them, because first, they have to challenge your characters with Bodyguard. Next, we have Challenger. Challenger will always have some sort of a plus, and this plus is when challenging, this creature gets plus strength, whatever the number is. And then next we have Evasive. Only characters with Evasive can challenge this character. This is a very powerful ability, is that it allows your characters to exert for lore without being challenged unless opposing characters also have Evasive. Then we have Reckless. A character with Reckless cannot quest and must challenge if able. While at a glance this may not sound very good, Reckless is usually given to characters that also have Rush. Characters with Rush can challenge the turn they are played. So if you have a character with Reckless and it also has Rush, it's essentially a removal effect. Then you have Shift. So Shift will also have a cost, and you will pay X amount of ink in order to play this on top of a character that's already named one of your other characters. So for example, I have Aladdin Street Rat in play, and I have Aladdin Heroic Outlaw in my hand. Aladdin Heroic Outlaw costs 7 ink to play. However, I can pay 5 ink, which is Aladdin Heroic Outlaw's shift costs, and just place it right on top of Aladdin Street Rat. Something that makes this so special is that now Aladdin Heroic Outlaw's ink is dry and I can actually use him the turn he comes into play. Next we have support. Whenever this character quests, you may add their strength to another character's strength this turn. And then finally we have ward. Opponents cannot choose this character except to challenge, so all effects except global effects, which would affect all characters on the board, cannot affect characters with ward, so it's a very powerful ability. So now that we've summed up most of the abilities and special cards, let's talk about deck building. In Lorcana, your deck must have at least 60 cards in it. It cannot contain more than 4 copies of any single card, and your deck can only contain cards from 1 or 2 different color inks. And that's basically it. Now you have everything that you need to play Lorcana, other than the cards. If you've stuck around this long, thank you so very much for watching. Feel free to leave any questions in the comments section below, and I would very much appreciate if you would like and subscribe for more content. Until next time, fellow gamers, take care.